Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Atlanta Film Festival and Creative Conference. Today, I have Adam and Steven from Buffalo 8 and a whole series of companies. Thank you guys for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. We're excited to be here.
So let's start by who is Buffalo 8? What does Buffalo 8 do? And you guys have a lot of kind of different companies that all work together. So let's give our audience an idea of what you guys do and where you come from.
Absolutely. Well, I'll walk you guys through kind of front to start, and then Stephen, you could complement where you see fit. So, Buffalo 8 is a production and services company. I'd say we're primarily known as a services company, though we are expanding our production side of things. But we are owned by Bondit Media Capital, and Bondit is what you call a senior lender. So we cash flow traditional media assets. These are things like the Georgia tax credit, minimum guarantees, pre-sales, all things we're happy to get into on this call. And we fund around 50 films a year this way. I would say everything from Woman of the Hour to Bob Trevino Likes It, which was the 2024 South by Southwest winner, to Terrifier 3, which was a huge outlier success at the box office this year. And then Buffalo 8, where Steven and I reside, was built to capture what's either premature for Bonded or overflows from Bonded. So we are a vertically integrated company. We own a 10,000 square foot post-production facility in Hollywood. We do around 40 films a year. I would say some examples are The Kill Room with Uma Thurman and Samuel L. Jackson, and we're doing the Pendragon show for the Daily Wire right now. We have a distribution arm. We have about 350 titles that we're distributing to date. We have an originals division. Our originals division has had some big successes, but notably we produced the Jeffrey Dahmer docuseries for Netflix, which did very well last year. And then we have a consulting arm. So Steven and I head up our originals division. We oversee the original projects that we'll bring in and ultimately package and shop and procure funding for. And as you could see, just looking through all the different verticals, we work very synergistically across the board. Am I missing anything, Stephen?
You guys also, don't you also have a payroll company and
I
do
was gonna
accounting as
say
well?
the most important part of all, making sure everyone gets paid. We're a partial owner of ABS Payroll, and so another service among the ones that Adam mentioned that we can bundle onto our productions and make sure that we're providing as much value as possible to the filmmakers we're working with.
Yeah, and the idea is that when you come into our system, that we could effectively, be supportive from A to Z. Now, I should say we're not a physical production company, so we're not the guys who are going to go to set and crew up and do all of that stuff. What we'll do is outsource to a line producer who knows the area really well. We'll oversee the front end of things, and then we'll pick back up the film once it's gone through post. And so we do a very good job at packaging movies, at procuring funding for movies, and ultimately selling films. But we leave it to the experts in terms of the physical producing of a movie.
Copy. So, that changes where I was going to head next, because there's some things that I didn't realize in what you guys just told me.
Well,
So I didn't realize you had a distribution arm.
We do.
So are you working like as a sales agent? Because you don't have a platform where you're putting things. You are selling the films to other platforms, correct?
Correct.
Well,
So I'll let Steven answer this one.
yeah, no, our distribution arm. So there's a lot of titles every year that we see at local film festivals, much like yours, that they end up hoping for the big Netflix deal, and those don't always come, and we know that, right? And so there's a lot of movies that exist in the lower budget spectrum that still have really good audiences that are cultivated from film festivals that need to get out there and online and get eyeballs on them. And so we focus more so on that side of distribution, digital distribution, and working with platforms like Tubi and Pluto and Roku, and of course all the larger buyers too. But we find that in the saturation in that market, again, we don't want to have films just getting made and everyone's hard work sits on a hard drive. So we want to make sure there's a landing spot for some of these smaller films too. It's one of the best ways that we are able to nurture relationships with early stage filmmakers who might make something really compelling that premieres at a film festival. And then if we're, at the front lines of getting that movie out there, hopefully we get to take a look at their second movie.
I love that. That is fantastic. So I'm going to come back and ask you more about that later, but we might as well go from kind of beginning to end. So let's kind of talk about the development stage. So, people make films every day, but and there is no kind of right way to make a film, but there is a right way to make a film. What are some of because you are dealing not only with your own projects, but things that you are finding at festivals, what are maybe some of the biggest hard truths or mistakes that you see filmmakers make in the development side when you are trying to package something or somebody brings you something to package?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to put a film together. It comes down to how somebody wants to put that film together. If their ambition is to get it set up at a Netflix or a studio or even a network, then coming to us with a film where they're a first-time feature director and they have maybe even some of their friends in place to act in that film, it's often not digestible on that higher scale. Where if their ambition is to do that and they have the network where they're going to raise their money from friends, family, doctors, and dentists, it's going to be a bit more digestible. And I think that's where we find the biggest disconnect is people who should be existing in that latter lane ambitiously want to be existing in that former lane without wanting to actually make a compromise. And filmmaking at the end of the day is a compromise.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I think about this all the time is that every film is its own business, and any other entrepreneur who's starting a business does very, very thorough market research to make sure that there's a place for the product in the market. And then with film, for some reason, it's nobody does. And so you get a lot of self-funded passion projects that are maybe interesting stories, but without considering who's the audience, who's the buyer, what are the economics of this. And look, I think it's all well intentioned. I think people love films, and they mean so much to people that it's natural to want to go and make your own. But there's also such a limited access to information about what the marketplace of film looks like that you just get these situations where you have those movies that get completed and struggle to sell. And so we're, because of the different lanes of what we do at Buffalo 8, we have access to a lot of different kinds of information that inform our decision making. And that's why we want to be involved as early as possible so that we can help, filmmakers understand, how to make an informed decision about their budget, their casting, shooting location, etc., lest they, don't find a buyer in the end.
Yeah. I find
Exactly.
a lot of filmmakers are like, well, this story's for everybody from 0 to 95. And it's like, no, it's really not. I think I took a class probably 20 years ago, and one of the greatest ways that they described it is think about your audience like a bullseye. So who is that one person who's absolutely interested in that topic? And then who is the next kind of largest group? If you're making a documentary about a triathlete who has cancer, you have the triathlete, you have the cancer group, you have other elite athletes, you have athletes in general, you have maybe cancer, what are those identifiable people, starting kind of from the inside out to really identify who they are. So you can do that market research, you can partner with people, you can look at other films that may have similar audiences and figure out what distribution companies might be interesting.
Absolutely. I think that grassroots marketing and audience building, audience cultivating approach is more necessary now than probably ever. Marketing budgets are shrinking and eyeballs are going to a very small subset of platforms. And so if you're not doing that, it's not just about what happens when your movie's done. It's how do you raise the money in the first place? It's all interrelated. And one thing I think about a lot too is be honest with yourself about your own viewing habits. You know, we're the three of us on this call are probably among the most engaged, you know, consumers of independent films or films in general. And yet, when's the last time either of you guys, you know, rented a movie that you scrolled past and you didn't recognize a cast member and you didn't have a relationship with the filmmaker and you chose to click to pay, right? So it's like, how are we consuming our media? And knowing that, let's make things that fit into those consumption habits and not just hope that there are people out there that are doing this kind of pay to click thing without having a real relationship to the material.
Yeah, I also think that it's really easy to blur the line when you're a creator who's so close to their material. And one of the things that we see a lot is somebody will bring a project to us where we could be solution oriented. They may be self-prohibitive to move something forward because it means that they have to sacrifice or compromise on something, to get it to a place where we feel as guys who exist in this marketplace, it could be sellable. And so a lot of times just understanding that, listen, not all feedback is going to be good feedback. This is a subjective industry, but to take it and stress test it with some folks and take a step back from it and be able to say to yourself, is this a authentic note? Does this authentically, make sense? And if it does, you're probably headed in the right direction of where you should take it. And that's usually how we help guide these folks into a place of there's going to be a real shot for this thing.
Yeah. Well, and also having the distribution company allows you access to know what the market can bear, what talent can put a seat in or a butt in a seat, or for digital, somebody who, again, will click and pay. And that knowledge is invaluable.
Yeah, well, here's something interesting. You look at movies that sell really well overseas. They're always genre leaning in the sense that they're horrors, they're thrillers, they're action movies. They're movies that you can put subtitles on and they translate. When you look at a coming of age drama or even a comedy, unless it's
Yeah.
the,
They don't
you know,
translate. It's a different sense of humor.
it's a different sense of humor, and that sentiment sometimes doesn't make sense to folks because they'll go and see a movie in a specific genre, whether it's a drama or it's a comedy, do very well on a huge worldwide box office standpoint. But they have to understand that those are far and few between, and most of those are in the 1% who have either made it past all the stress tests of the Sundance film festivals of the world, or they've got such notable folks at the helm of it that there's a real appetite for a studio to put a marketing budget behind it, and most films are not going to get that budget.
Yeah.
I think there's so much like reading between the lines that you have to do. Like what a recent one that came up a ton in all of our conversations is Anora winning Best Picture. And a lot of, first time and second time filmmakers interpreted that as, well, if Anora can do it, I can do it. And I encourage the thinking, but there are a lot of steps in between, right? Sean Baker's made so many films, already been Oscar nominated, like he had the cachet and of course the talent to back it up, but he was not a stranger to this scene and his team wasn't either. And that's, so much. So even though it was a lower budget film and it didn't have the star power that we're accustomed to with some of these Oscar winning movies, it's in a different category of indie than, a lot of the things
And
that
those Oscar campaigns, they're not cheap. Somebody has to come behind them and support their ability to put the marketing dollars to get folks to recognize what that movie is.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
love looking at people's comparables, which I stopped doing, a couple decades ago because they're BS. But, I love looking at like this movie with all these movie stars that, made this much of the box office is so similar to ours. And it's like, wow, if you are, that's like a red flag to me that you are so out of touch. But again, sometimes it's just a lack of knowledge. I'm going to run into that China shop and be a bull because I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm focused and I'm going to make this thing happen. And they're not kind of slowing down and educating themselves and really in tune with what they have and how it truly compares. Like Anora is a perfect example.
Yeah, well, and another one, I don't want to, be unkind because we want those filmmakers, right? When you need someone with that energy, because that's the
Absolutely.
only way anything gets done. But
Mhm.
another one that comes to mind is Lady Bird, and it gets cited as first time film and low budget and all these things, but it's like a first time filmmaker who's been in the business forever and knew everyone and had honed their craft and their talent and their ability to tell a story in front of the camera, and then also just through all those experiences. I mean, there was no question that Greta Gerwig would be a phenomenal director once she, stepped into that role. So it's like, but to your point, oh, it's a coming of age story about, a young girl finding herself, and my script is too, so that, this could be Lady Bird, and it's like, let's not forget all those other components that made it Lady Bird.
Yeah. Let's back up into kind of the business side of things, because this is another thing I see a lot. People not negotiating their contracts up front. And I don't mean with a distributor or with the cast. I
Yeah,
mean, who owns it? Like
this is
so
a
many people, it's that handshake. This is my best friend and I making a movie. And then money gets involved and things get a little wonky. Let's talk about
so
how, what you should have when you're starting out.
yeah, this is one of my favorite questions. I mean, what you're referring to effectively is what we call chain of title.
Mhm.
And that's who contractually is attached to the intellectual property. And one of the important steps to take is making sure that you have the rights to take a script out. So if you're an independent producer and you do a handshake deal with the writer, I mean, I'll give you just a side tangent on the best story. I had a film. We had gotten Lucy Liu attached to star in the movie, and we were on a handshake deal with the writer. And effectively, that movie fell apart because when we went to go and do the writer's deal, he didn't accept it. And it was in line with what we had put, forth in our discussions. And it was more than we as producers were even taking on the project, and it met all the WJ minimums. But he decided that that's not the deal I want to take, and there wasn't much we could do to rectify it because we didn't make a paper deal in place that we could lean into. So it's important that there is an option agreement in place that upfront outlines what, at a minimum, you don't have to accept a deal right then and there, but it is nice to at least outline what the different parties expect at a minimum. And when you're transparent up front like that, and when you all come together and agree on something, even if it's just a simple agreement, there's less arguments that can happen down the road. It's the same way when you enter into a relationship with someone, right? As long as you're upfront with what's important to you, what your ambition is, and what your deal breakers are, so to speak, you're going to mitigate so much of a headache down the line. And when we've certainly learned it the hard way, but oftentimes it's just making sure that you have that paperwork in place. And again, it doesn't need to be in an aggressive negotiation. It can be a mutual understanding that this is what you both expect from the deal, and let that piece of paper serve as the tiebreaker for anything that comes up going forth, is to say, hey, we put a precedent in place here and we agreed upon it moving into this.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
credit has to go into that too. It's not just the monetary part and who owns it, but what is my credit going to be? Because a lot of times what you think you should be getting is not what you end up getting. And it becomes as the
Yeah.
hard feelings have come up throughout, suddenly somebody wants more than somebody else is going to give, and laying all that out.
And what are your
Right.
responsibilities going to be, right?
Yeah.
What are you going to be obligated to do? Do you just need to phone in once a week, or are you going to be active putting things on a day-to-day basis together? There may be effective roles in both of those buckets.
Yeah, I also think it's like it's much easier to amend an existing agreement than just create one, once you're halfway through a negotiation. But the credit and fee structure, it's also, I think we find it advantageous to be a bit allow it to be contingent on results, right? So we'll put floors as to
Mhm.
what we say this is the minimum we'd expect contingent that we can bring this amount of money or bring this key piece of cast or whatever it may be. But that way it also gives, I think, it's a gesture to give the creator that we're working with an understanding that we're not just taking this EP credit, for example, and then run away and still expect it if we haven't done our job as well. So we try to create agreements that are just contingent on a certain level of value that we would bring to the table.
Exactly.
Are
And
there-
go
Go ahead.
ahead. Well, I was just going to say, like a lot of times when we put those agreements together, what you're actually saying is we're entering into a partnership and we don't know what the ultimate appetite is within the marketplace. Is this going to be $1 million movie? Is this going to be a $3 million movie? We know that we want to at least get a executive producer credit. We know that we want a fee that is X amount of the budget, and more importantly, X amount of maybe what we contribute bringing into the budget. And then ultimately they serve most times as an ability for both parties to negotiate their deals directly with whatever funding entity comes in place. So there's still an ability for you to have that wiggle room and make your case, but at least you have precedent in place so that when those negotiations come to fruition, you're not just telling them two different stories, and that's where people get into an argument.
Have you seen what you were talking about? Made me think of something else too. Have you seen or have you experienced filmmakers who come to you that have kind of already given away everything? In other words, like, you've got your pie and they've already promised everybody a piece of the pie, and then there's no pie left and there's nowhere to go.
Right.
A lot.
A
Well,
lot.
I think
Yeah. Mostly when it's like, they've come and they said, I'm starring in this movie and, it's going to be a $20 million film and we don't know who they are. Or it's like, I'm in this film and three of my college buddies are in and you can't move them out of these roles. And it's like, well, I think in good faith, we want to figure out how to uphold that structure, but we can't guarantee that who's gonna invest potentially millions of dollars into this project is going to want that. There's a fiscal responsibility that has to be met as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I also think, to like giving too much of the pie away. I see it a lot in the indie sort of, for lack of a better term, self-financed
Mhm.
space, where people are working at, on deferrals and, kind of volunteer or favor rates. And then the exchanges will give you points. And so suddenly you're looking at a waterfall and your assistant editor has a couple of points in it. And it's just like, it's hard to, in the current climate, those points are not really worthwhile in the first place. And with that in mind, why give them away and make it less attractive to the people you're approaching as investors who are now having to deal with the dilution in the waterfall because had a hard time telling your friend that's a DP that you just really need them to work for $100 a day or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so I see that a lot, and I'm just not sure who it serves. And I wish we could kind of get that thinking out of our heads on these smaller films, that giving away points is a good negotiating tactic.
Well, here's something good that comes from that, Steven, is filmmakers should know that your first film is not your first payday. Like that is the most important thing. You are not going to buy a house off of your first movie. Maybe one in a million people do, but the reality is you're going to use it to pad your resume. It's going to be a great first opportunity for you to do the next one. And what we see often, and what we were talking about earlier today, is what's attractive on a commercial scale is these filmmakers who come off of their first film where they do well at a Sundance or they do well at a South by Southwest. These bigger production companies, they want to work with these quote unquote newer film directors, but they want them to have a level of notoriety in the sense they've proven themselves once before. It's like anybody you would
Yeah.
hire for a big job.
And it's funny too, just to kind of riff off this for us, because we've produced a bunch of movies that are first time directors that get to that point where, you know, the first time director, nobody from a traditional media finance pool is going to cut a check. So you got to roll up your sleeves and figure out how else to raise the money. But then when they get to that next step, how do you as a producer who was there from the beginning still be involved in that director, writer, you know, career growth trajectory? Because it's not guaranteed. And that goes back to agreements and understandings between people early on, because you see so many people make a really cool indie, do well at festivals, and then they skyrocket and the rest of their team is still, you know.
Yeah. And there's prolific producers, right? Like Christine, what's her last name?
Yeah.
Vachon, you know, who is Todd Haynes' producing partner, and through that relationship has done, you know, everything from these smaller movies up to May, December, right? I think that's the great example of how you elevate as a producer.
Grow as teams. I think that's a huge part of our you know vision and our mission here with what Adam and I are doing at Buffalo 8 is just like make sure that we're growing alongside everyone and we're not ignoring the first time, second time filmmakers, because you know that's where in many cases the most interesting work is being made and the most interesting voices are being cultivated, and we just want to be, you know, on the ground floor with those folks, much like how Killer Films has become what it is.
So let's talk still in kind of the development phase. When it comes to casting, you know, how are you guys involved in that? How important is that to what you do? And what are the, you know, distributors, I've always gone to the distributor and say, hey, you know, if they're interested in the idea and they're like, yeah, we'd consider it. And if I can get them, you know, in the mood to give us advice, you know, I'll run different actors by them because the distribution companies know who, you know, they have the numbers that they don't share with anyone. So how is an independent filmmaker? Is it like the IMDb star meter? Like how do independent filmmakers figure out what is that best B or C or D list actor that maybe, you know, isn't a name, but you've seen their face. So it's a recognizable face that somebody would click on. How do you make those decisions?
So the real answer is that no B, C, or D actor is going to do it in terms of a distributor coming in and putting up a minimum guarantee for it, or a sales rep being able to effectively take it to Cannes and
Oh,
sell some
absolutely. Yeah.
territories on it. But I mean, this is effectively how films that are debt financed are reverse engineered. They go, like you said, to a distributor and they get a sense for what those values would be. Now, you know, a lot of people will say, well, how do you get that talent? And sometimes it's, you know, not as easy because you don't have funding in place, right? That's where we lean into a director. You know, there's films that we've put together where we've gotten a notable director in place, and without having to put that pay or play offer into a piece of talent, we've been able to lean on their previous relationship to, you know, use them as a lure to get that actor to read the script and commit. And in that case, similar to how we put in floor prices for what we expect as producers, we may put a, you know, finance contingent offer in place to that actor, but it's more digestible to them because they know who they're going to be working with. And, you know, the other way to do it is, which a lot of independent filmmakers who are risk takers will do, is they put up a certain percentage of what the actor's salary would be, or what we call a holding fee. So they'll put down 10% of the actor's salary. It will be non-refundable, and some of the actors that you're going to need are going to be multi-million-dollar, you know, payday guys.
Yeah, that's why I was like, pay to play. Anytime
Yeah.
anybody's ever asked me about that, I'm like, don't do it because you're never going to get your shit together in time to
Correct.
actually
I think
play.
there's a
You're going
lot
to
of
always have to pay.
Yeah, so
there's a
we'll
lot of
mitigate it.
yeah, go ahead.
We'll mitigate it by putting down 10%, and you have to have an appetite to lose that 10%, and it will go against their ultimate fee. But you know, it is the risk, and why inherently it is so difficult to put a film together that is pre-sold within the marketplace.
And I think it's also an area that has a general cloud or a lack of information around it. So a pay or play offer in our minds is not a tool to spend 20 or 40 or $60,000 on someone and then assume that the money will magically appear from there. It can be utilized if you have a sales partner engaged, a distributor engaged, an equity partner engaged, you know where you're shooting. Like if you've got your finance plan sort of in place and the corresponding, or companies that you would need to trigger all these different things, you can use a pay or play offer to great effect, and you can get that piece of bankable talent that unlocks all the rest. But a lot of films get made that way, and a lot of Bondit films are made that way, that we bank the pre-sales and MGs that all started at that point with a cast deposit, but with an understanding of the path. And I think oftentimes, Adam and I will see a project that a filmmaker has sunk tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars into assembling a cast that we know is not financeable. And that's because that person was following bad advice to make a pay or play offer without talking to the
Or
net.
they assume, right? They see somebody who is, you mentioned the star meter on IMDb. Yeah, that's a helpful way to look at it. Like the rule of thumb is like, anybody under 250 is going to have some sort of value, but it's misleading. When you have a show that premieres on Netflix, the top 10 people are going to be whoever the stars of that show are for the next week. So, that TV audience often doesn't translate into that international audience. And the names that are going to be worth something from a sales perspective, they're going to be obvious. It's the Bruce Willises, the Mel Gibsons, the John Travoltas of the world who are going to bring in that value. Robert De Niro, Al Pacino's, they're going to be obvious names to you. If you have to ask, is this name valuable? They're probably not. In terms of getting your movie fully financed in a capacity that we're speaking about.
I think that's another area. There's kind of two things that are worth unpacking, which is one, talent value, actor value. There's often this assumption that like everyone's got a dollar sign over their head that's a one-to-one translation with an international market and so on and so forth, which is far from the case. As Adam said, there's a very small and very rather unattainable group of actors in terms of for early stage director that are obvious. But I think where there's some room for optimism is that it's not always doesn't always have to be just about who can get my movie pre-sold. A lot of what we'll do on these smaller films is, okay, maybe we can't get Brad Pitt, but can we get someone who, to your point, Linda, is known to audiences, very much working and prolific, and we know that that will add value to a completed film in terms of an acquisition or licensing deals, so on and so forth, and can bolster the marketing campaign. And so we can take that and bring that back to independent financiers or equity investors and raise the budget that way. And so it's not that you lose all hope if you can't get the most A-list of A-list people. Just the strategy is a bit more bespoke, and you should be thinking about how to leverage your actors, their own followings, their own audience, and making sure up front when you offer them something that part of the buy-in for them to do that role is also that they're going to stick with you and promote the film with you.
And that's something that has to be written in the contract, because
correct.
I can't tell you how many films have gotten the stars and they're like, well, we're not doing that. You have to pay us. That's extra. They don't think about
Totally.
that.
That's the famous Kevin Hart example where they came to him and asked him to promote the movie, and he said, "Listen, I'm a brand. You should pay me like Nike to if you want to use my name and likeness." And that was where the studio said, "Oh, we should start writing this into our contracts that they've got to be on board with that." But just a side note, when you do engage these folks, another important thing, like especially with directors, is understanding who their network is. What actors do they have good relationships with? Can they pick up the phone and call someone versus having to go through the political process of going through a representative who oftentimes has different objectives in mind than finding necessarily the best content for their client. They need to make sure that they're not only bringing the most creative thing to their client, but that their client is going to get paid. So when you even go and bring a film to an agent, it might have it might be the best script that's ever been written, but if the agent brings it and the client spends 2 hours reading it and they love it, and then they put the client in touch with your team and they fall in love with your team, and then 6 months later the movie hasn't happened, they're going to fire their agent because they wasted their time, right? Like, that's another important point. So whenever we go about this, a lot of times we say, let's go relationship based first before we just go transactionally based, because relationship based gives us more leeway and breathing room to put a project together than when you're putting that pay or play offer in, and then you've got this gun against your head to get it done by a certain date, or you lose that fee.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think, directors, it's important to think about it from an actor's point of view. What would get them excited? Because we all know that the director wants to work with, I'll just stick with Brad Pitt as an example. We all know the director wants to work with Brad Pitt, but why would Brad Pitt want to work with you, you know? And I feel like that to me is like, you know, if you think about it that way, and that's where I think regional film festivals and things start to come in really handy, is even if you haven't made your first feature, if you can position yourself as a rising talent, you've got some work samples that are exciting to people, and you're kind of on that cusp, you can find an angle to get a really valuable actor engaged with you. But if you are just simply thinking, I need this person because they bring value to my film, well, unfortunately, the actor already knows that about themselves, and it's not probably super interesting to them to do you that favor, essentially, whatever the money deal looks like. They want, for their own reasons, to be working on exciting films with exciting filmmakers to build their own careers. And I think it's important to kind of look in the mirror a little bit when you're thinking about your cast wish list. When you're, especially, like I said, an early stage director, it changes when you progress.
Yeah.
I tell people, if you're a first time feature filmmaker and you're overly ambitious as to who you want to cast, it's like me offering you a job and then you saying, great, what is the company that I'm going to be working for? And I say, don't worry about it. So it's kind of sketchy. Like, it's not a compelling case.
Yeah, exactly.
So what are some of the, I mean, I guess we've talked a little bit about it from the casting side, but what are some of the other compromises that you think filmmakers should be looking at because a lot of times, especially with first timers, it's that drive and ambition, right? They know they are the sole focus to get this thing done, but they forget about this little thing called collaboration. And that sometimes you have to, especially budget wise, you have to, no, you can't have a Lamborghini unless you have a friend with a Lamborghini, So what are some of the kind of, I guess, compromises that you see filmmakers make based on those budget levels? It could be a $1 million film. It could be a $5 million film. It could be a $10 million film based on the cast. So how do you kind of navigate that? If that makes sense.
I mean, again, I think so much of it comes down to respecting the marketplace that you're working within. So if you're trying to trying to tell a story that is, any financier from a mile away can see does not have inherent commercial value. I mean, if you're super far off, then you have to be reliant on friends and family finance. But I think there's a lot of compromise to be made in the middle where, like, I have, a movie right now that is actually a couple movies that are, kind of have crime thriller or psychological thriller elements. We lost Adam. I'm sure he'll be back.
I'll let him back in.
Okay. He said his power went out, but
Oh no.
he'll be back. I'll just keep going. But it's like, but ultimately are dramas, right? And so we're talking to distributors. These are completed films, and they're going, well, there's about 15 minutes of this movie, and if the whole movie were that way, we might have a deal here. But instead, you kind of made more of just a talking head drama, and it's just not enough for me. And that's been really instructive to me, again, with those completed films, now thinking about development. Like, let's acknowledge the market that we're in, and that if you have a genre angle to something, you're going to get a lot closer towards achieving your goals of funding your film and getting distribution, which, by the way, are other things that actors are looking for. They want to know that the movie's also going to go somewhere. So I think there's just a tonal thing with genre that filmmakers have to be, sober about.
Yeah.
But then from a budget, outside of that, from a budgetary perspective, I mean, it's so project by project in terms of where the elements of compromise would be, but I think willingness to compromise matched with having a strong vision is one of the things that me as a producer, I'm always looking out for. What is that balance? Because if a director displays zero willingness or interest in compromise early on, then that's a person I'm less interested in working with.
Big red
By the
flag.
same token, if they say, offer too many compromises, you start to wonder, do they lack a vision, and how is that gonna, they're supposed to be the captain of this ship, if we're gonna go raise money and all this stuff, we want to know we have a strong leader. And so finding directors that have that perfect kind of 60-40 split on that is a constant challenge that I consider like creative producing, sussing
Yeah.
out these personalities and figuring which horse to back.
I think that's a really important point. Is compromise is important, but if you don't have that strong sense of vision and know where the army needs to march and why they're marching, it's a problem. While you were talking, it made me think of something else I think I'm curious about. So a lot of times you see a low budget film that has a star in it, and you got them for one day, right? Maybe 2 days. And like you stick them in like one scene, so they pop up for one and then never seen again. And it's like, I feel like I got ripped off. How important is it to make sure that when you have these stars or a star, that you kind of figure out how to pepper them, beginning, middle, and end? Do you find that is something that is important to the audience or to the distributors?
Very. In fact, when a distributor puts up a distribution guarantee on a film, often they'll put contingencies in place for how long that, what we call like stunt casted actor, will need to be in the film. And oftentimes it'll include things like, we need a shot of them on set, we need a shot of them and the other notable person in the film, so that if we do try to take a still for the trailer, that's in place. So listen, you can only do so much when you have like a Bruce Willis for 2 days, where he comes in and literally he's in and out on a jet within 48 hours and not even a minute more than that. But yeah, it's important to think about, because you want to have continuity across your film, and you certainly don't want to leave your audience hanging, or have them going on to Letterboxd and writing bad reviews about your project.
Well, but I say by the same token, like, yeah, I think if they're in part of the fabric of the film, and it creatively makes sense to do it. But I wouldn't advise spending an inordinate amount of money relative to the rest of your budget on a stunt casted cameo, and assuming that is going to dramatically increase the chances of your film's sale. I think maybe that calculation 5-10 years ago was working, but I don't think it is in the current landscape. So, while again, there's two sides to this coin, because it's so important to have recognizable faces in your indie film, but at the same time, to overspend on people that are the kind of like that guy crowd, where they're known but not so known, it can also put you in a tight spot with your budget.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
that's where
I
we're
think
constantly finding it's a real-time fluctuation that
And we also get folks who come to us and they're like, oh, this is a great stunt role. Like, I wouldn't just go about your movie, with that as the forefront of it, unless there's a sales representative or a distributor who's directly saying, you get this person and we'll give you X, and the economics of how to reverse engineer that, then go creatively put the best movie you can together, and go about it in a realistic way. If you have the pieces of the puzzle that warrant you taking it to a streamer, then you've got to understand the bar is going to be higher than you probably think. But if you have the ability to go raise the money for a film, then go make the best creative thing you can and become the next Sean Baker. There's different lanes that you could play this game in, and you just have to understand what lane are you in and be realistic about it. Don't lie to yourself and say you're somewhere that you're not because you're overly ambitious. A lot of Stephen and I is we're not going to hit a home run every time. Our goal as experienced producers is to get on base. A bird in hand is better than two in the bush. And that doesn't mean you need to compromise your vision, but it does mean you need to go about it living in reality.
Yeah, reality, it's like, again, the first time film is the career launching film, not the money making film. And I think if you can frame it in your own mind when you're setting out on this journey as the first leg of a marathon, you'll achieve much better results, and you'll be happier with the amount of money you spent, the amount of work that you did, and the opportunities that you got out of it than just thinking too big, early on.
So that kind of leads into another question. There are things I think, like kind of looking at reverse engineering. There are things that we're like, if you got these things in place, we could probably get that idea funded. But is that a great movie, or is it just something that can get funded? So does that make sense? Like, have you seen projects that come to you that were like, it's not that great, but it's got the elements that I could sell? How do you decide what to do with something like that? Because the first time filmmaker, it's a career launcher, but a lot of first time filmmakers get caught up in, well, this is the genre that I think is doing well, so I'm going to create this kind of project instead of something that could really be great and launch their career because they're not thinking about it the right way.
Yeah.
I think of those. Well, you go ahead, Adam.
Listen, there's all sorts of business that could be made in film. So you are going to get those quote unquote schlocky movies that are the shoot 'em up, bang, bang, put John Travolta in the film for 2 days and smear his face on the poster and sell it all over international territories. Like, that is a very specific type of movie. And oftentimes they're really fun, right? But they're not going to be, creative masterpieces often because there are limiting from a financial structure in terms of how long those films are able to afford to shoot their film. And oftentimes those films are, sometimes sub 15 days. And the reality is they're paying so much money above the line to try and reverse engineer it that they often miss out on what they can actually spend on the actual film. So, I mean,
I think they're like,
yeah.
they're like they're separate categories of films, in my opinion. Like the kind of movie that Adam's describing, there's a place for that in the market. I mean, that keeps a lot of people working. They sell them internationally. We may not even know some of the titles that these big movie stars have been doing, but it's an active piece of the market. But a first or second time filmmaker is not going to have access to that kind of deal making. I mean, that's what we were talking about earlier. Like, you use a pay or play offer, but if you don't know your international buyers and your sales agents, then it's not even worth really focusing
Yeah,
on.
yeah. In fact, I think that's the best advice so far is like a lot of people come to us thinking, oh, how easy would it be to put a movie together that way? And just because the market exists doesn't mean that it's accessible. And the reality is that is one of the hardest markets to be successful in. And when you see these producers who are running this as a business, for profit, not for creativity, they're doing it at the very highest level. And it is so competitive there that they're just one misstep away from, not having that movie go.
Yeah. And I think too, it's like those distributors and sales agents also are looking at the director just like the piece of talent is. So if you don't have, something to show to someone to demonstrate your ability to handle a budget of this size, run a team of this size, etc., then you're kind of dead on arrival. I think it's more interesting to focus on sort of not think about that part of the market on your first movie and think about the movies that were independently financed, leveraging somebody's own network, and the people who are writing checks want to really just back that filmmaker and go make something highly original. And many of my favorite films recently are in that category, and classics like movies like Slacker and you know, like a Hard Eight with Paul Thomas Anderson, where he just scraps together the money from some friends and family and showcases a vision. That type of filmmaking has virtually nothing to do with pre-sales and movie stars and talent reps, and so I think that's where people should be focusing their efforts for their first film.
Yeah, and putting a real plan in place so that they can approach people in their network and secure the funding in a tangible way without, Linda, like you put forth on there, putting the comparables in place that just because this movie made 100 million at the box office, so is theirs. The approach a lot of times is, do it for a price that is somewhere between a labor of love in a business, but don't do it for a price that you're not going to be able to recoup on, because the reality is when a movie makes 100 million at a box office, they likely spent close to that marketing that film.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's the thing that people don't realize. A $5 million film needs 5 million, $10 million in marketing, and then the market can't bear that.
Marketing, and your people also forget you're splitting this revenue with theaters and a lot of other people in between. There's a lot of places that money has to filter through until it comes back to your pocket. Unless, yeah.
Yeah. The points I've been given in the past have always just paid me what I would have gotten paid to do the movie in the first place had they paid me.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's better to just take a probably it depends on the movie, but probably just if you want to defer your fee, but just make it a flat fee that's owed to you upon, probably I wouldn't even say sale of the film, because sometimes that sale never comes. They take a licensing deal and, but certainly the points notion for anything that's not A-list is yeah, I think expired.
Yeah.
It
Well,
expired.
I think it has been looked at by independent filmmakers as a way to say, I know you're working for me for free, but you're an industry professional that I can't pay. So the least I can do is if we get a hit,
Totally.
you're going to get a piece of it. And that's really where that comes from. It's just 90%, if I had $1 for every point I had in my 30-year career, woo, I'd have numerous houses now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So with all of these films that you guys have been doing, what are some of the, I guess, what are some of the aha moments? Like, when was a moment that somebody said yes to something or offered you a piece of advice that really kind of changed the trajectory? Or maybe it was just a hard lesson learned. Like, what are some of those kind of career defining moments that you have learned in this space you guys are now in?
Well, Stephen has some good ones, I know for sure, but one of the ones that we both learned together recently is when you find somebody who is either A, they love your project and it's not right for them, or B, they actually love your project and they end up investing in it. A lot of people have a tendency just to go look towards the next person. We now look through those people. We say, if you're investing in our movie, thank you. And who else from your network should we talk to? Is there anyone else like you? And that's oftentimes how we are able to fish through where we can find things. Conversely, we may take a project to a studio and they say, we love this, but it's not for us. A lot of people would just run home with their, head slumped down, where we'll say, hey, that's great and totally okay. Is there anyone from your network who, we should be talking to? And that often, that aha moment has led to a lot of success for us.
Yeah, I like to say that today's no could be tomorrow's yes as well, because a lot of times when someone passes on something, they think, oh, well, they've rejected me, so I'm not going to go back to get rejected again. And they don't realize this thing might not be right, but that doesn't mean they still aren't interested in you or your voice or your style, or, other projects that you may have down the road. But what are some other
Oh,
things,
100%.
Stephen, that
Well,
you've
Bondit and Buffalo 8 and our relationship is largely built off that idea. It's like if a project is submitted to Bondit, but it's premature for the kind of financing they offer, the last thing we want to do is just say pass and send them to the wind. That's why the consulting side of the company started years ago, which preceded me and even Adam. But it's like the idea is let's create relationships with these folks and see where it goes, because there's a lot of talent out there that just needs some guidance, but my big aha moment, certainly there's been many. I would say the biggest one in my producing career, and even before I joined Buffalo 8, kind of what I think got me here to Buffalo 8 was this Christmas movie that I produced called Breakup Season a couple of years back. And it was one of these things, going back to a director who has the right amount of vision plus stubbornness, and how that balance, and what it was in this case was a director who I had known as a friend from film school. We never really worked together. He had been incubating this project in a small town in Eastern Oregon called La Grande, Oregon, which was the home to a film festival and a writer's residency program. So he had shorts there and participated in the program, and he fell in love with this region, and he wanted to make his movie there. But when he called me to get it made, it was a wildly impractical thing to do, because it was out in the middle of nowhere. It was 4 hours from Portland, which is the nearest city with any kind of production and crew infrastructure. And we told him, and he had raised a little bit of money already. So it's like this was a real project that we could make in a very scrappy indie way. But his expectations of making it in this town created essentially a giant shortfall in the amount of finance that we had, because he didn't realize the uptick that it would take to kind of get our movie, or get our people and our crew and our gear and everything out into this remote place and stay there for a month and make this movie. So I told him, let's shoot this movie in Santa Clarita with a snow machine like every other Christmas film gets done. And he said, no, like we have to figure out how to do this in a way that, it sets it apart from other Christmas films. And I said, all right, let's go visit this town and see if we can raise the shortfall locally. And we went on a 3-day, scout trip, and we met the mayor, and we sat down with the economic development office and every person who owned a bar and a hotel and a restaurant and a coffee shop, and just all the stakeholders in this community. And we started to get to know them, and we said, look, we want to make our movie here. It's about this place, and we want to put this place on screen, but we need your help doing so. And it took us some trial and error to kind of nail down that pitch. But once we had understood that it meant something to some of these folks to not only tell a story about this town, but also create jobs for the community, hire the college kids and bring them on our set. The fact that our crew from Portland was going to be spending money in their bars and staying at their hotels, and bringing their family in on the weekends to go, souvenir shopping and all this stuff. And once we kind of built this understanding of what the impact our production would have to their town, the money came. I mean, we had to scrap it together, but it came, and we reached the point where it made sense to go out and do that movie. And it was the funnest shoot I've ever been on, because it was outside of LA, and we were all kind of bunked together and became one big happy family. So I say all that to say, I think when we think about, and this was a first time filmmaker, and it helped me understand that there is still a ton of excitement for filmmaking in places that are outside LA and New York. There are people who want to get involved and don't know how. And a lot of what we see part of our role is to invite those people in, give them pathways and possibilities to have a creative ownership over these kinds of projects, and and deliver them an experience that they wouldn't have had otherwise, and I think when you can reframe the idea of what your first film is for in those terms, it becomes a lot easier to raise the money and to get it done. And then the outcome in terms of sales and distribution, there's a bit less pressure on it to become this big, record Sundance sale, because people didn't buy in for that reason in the first place. They bought in to be a part of it, and you already delivered that to them.
Yeah,
So
I love that story.
thanks. It's informed so much of what we do here, and what Adam and I do everywhere we travel, including Atlanta. It's this regional funding kind of model is increasingly making more and more sense in a landscape where films funded by worldwide MGs or international pre-sales are getting scarcer and scarcer. And this is how we're replacing some of the, essentially equity stack in a film's finance plan to still have an independent film business in 10 years, frankly.
Yeah.
And Stephen will be at the Atlanta Film Fest, so please do come up
Nice.
with him to ask him some good stories on Breakup Season. It's a great movie, it really is.
So are there other examples of filmmakers who have kind of surprised you with their outside of the box thinking of how to get something financed? Because, last year we had a panel on, equity and bank loans. And basically the audience learned that's never going to happen. Because, you don't have what it takes to have a bank loan you money unless you're doing the pre-sales, selling the tax credits, all of the things that many first-time filmmakers don't have because they're not qualified either at the budget level of those incentives or for whatever reasons. But, what are some of the other things that you might have run into from filmmakers who you're like, oh, damn, that's a really great idea?
Well, certainly the regional funding model that I just described was one of those big ones, but I'll give some more detail on how it worked. One key thing was the film festival that was anchored in that town, Eastern Oregon Film Festival. They came on this project as a fiscal sponsor. And I think fiscal sponsorship as a complementary part of how you're fundraising is a really key thing to understand if you're making like a first or second
Let me
film.
ask a question though, because, and tell me if I'm wrong, I thought you can't have fiscal sponsorship and also investors because one is a
Common misconception. And this is what, so when we were basically, you can carve out, the finance in any way that sort of fits for your people that want to support you. So what we did is we had, the LLC for the film, the festival fiscally sponsored the film, and when we would approach potential fundraisers, we sort of thought of it as a menu of options, and that included also corporate sponsorships. We had the local college gave us money from their marketing budget towards our film, as a corporate sponsor, and then in-kind goods and services kind of thing. So I think one of the big things that we learned was the more ways you can make it easy and possible for someone to support you in a way that makes sense to them, the further you're going to get. Because, especially if you're doing a $500,000 movie, for anyone who's got any real money to put in, it's not even worth the paperwork to put an investor, the time that it takes to go through the paperwork for an investor agreement that's, a drop in the bucket for them. Whereas people who may be, have some discretionary income and want to support, but maybe it's $25,000 or $50,000. Well, that may work better for them to give charitably to your fiscal sponsor and take a tax write-off for it. And so if you as an entity, as a film, can do both and offer both, then no matter which conversation you enter with a potential supporter, you've got a path forward for them. I think that one
And
was
it needs to be structured properly, right? I think at the end of the day, it's making sure that everything is papered and that you're using an attorney and somebody who understands how to put that forth, because you don't want to, mix accounts, right? Like you don't
well,
want
and
the CAMA or the collection account management agreement to, be messed with.
well, the beauty of and by the way, this kind of fundraising only works for smaller scale films. I mean, there'd be no sense in doing it for a multi-million-dollar movie. But it's also that money, if somebody donates to your film, and I'm less so talking crowdfunding, which is not
Right.
our area, but higher dollar amount donations that can add up if you have enough of those people. That's also non-recoupable, So in terms of you make your movie for $500,000, but 150 of it was in donations through your fiscal sponsor, suddenly you only have to make 350 back. You pair that with a tax credit like we did in Oregon, it's 25% cash rebate of our overall budget just came back to us and a wire transfer in our bank account. I mean, a really good tax program up there, tax incentive program up in Oregon, but like suddenly the economics of your movie are creating an environment for you where maybe there is a path to profitability on an AVOD like a Tubi or a Pluto, even if you don't have major stars and so on and so forth. And
Yeah.
that's where I think the hope is for the indie first time category of filmmakers who are making that jump from short to feature. It's everything I just described is where you should focus your efforts and think about Netflix and movie stars later in your career.
So as a first-time filmmaker, you know, especially if you haven't done a series of shorts and built up kind of not only a body of work, but also your tribe, you know, how how do I come as a first-time filmmaker? Maybe my script is great, but how do I come to somebody like you and prove that I can actually make shit happen? Because, you know, lots of people try to make films and they never get finished. How do I build trust with someone like you and also build trust in getting a good DP, in convincing a good cast? I mean, sure, you can be a great pitch person, but at the end of the pitch, they're like, well, okay, your story's great and I really like you, but you don't know what the hell you're doing. Who's going to see this through? How do you build up that trust and get deals done when you don't have a lot of experience?
Well, here's the reality. Even the most successful filmmakers are going to flop sometimes, and what you need is to have a precedent to show that you can do something. It doesn't mean you need to have a feature film on your slate, but you need to have a good short on your slate, and maybe you make a short that is in the vein of what the feature could be, so that the producer understands there's something here. We often, you know, some of our favorite projects that we're shopping right now, the filmmaker's done an unbelievable job self-financing, you know, the 10-minute version of what this would be, to the effect that it's an undeniable shopping tool. So when you go back to what I said at the beginning, is even the most experienced filmmakers flop, they're getting that opportunity to flop because they have precedent in place. So a
Right.
lot of times it's putting your precedent in place, or being able to talk to us in a way that we can understand you have a grip on what you're doing, that you live in reality. You know, we
Yeah.
so many people who are not firmly planted on the ground.
Well, that's kind of what I was gonna say is I think the simple answer to that question is you do the work. You know, there's no real basis to build a trusting relationship unless the way that you build the trust is you do the work. You know, if you then sometimes I get that sometimes you don't have a large body of short films and that's okay, but then I'd press for other things that help me understand someone's vision. So I say like, you know, show me your lookbook. Well, if they haven't put one together or don't know how to put one together, that right there is telling that they may not be ready to direct a film with other people's money, right? Or where are you at with the process in terms of your fundraising? You know, if they just want someone else to do it all, that's another indicator that they may not be ready, right? So, but if someone comes in, they're self-motivated and they've already done as much as they can within their own, just with their sweat equity, and I can see, or we can see that that person is someone who gets stuff done, then we're much more inclined to, you know,
Yeah.
have a more real conversation.
Another example that comes to mind is, and I won't name them, but Stephen and I have a very close friend who he's an actor. And when he was getting started, this is going back 10, 12 years ago now, me and some of my friends, we said, hey, let's make a, you know, like a mini series for YouTube. And so we put this thing together, and our friend started it because he, to this day, has been willing to participate and has been humble about, you know, playing in roles. And then we had another guy who was a bit of a bigger name, who we said, hey, would you come and participate in our thing? And he said, oh, this is below me. You know, I don't want to do it. It's just a mini series. Well, our friend just had a role in Chris Nolan's last movie. The guy who did not turn the role down has since retired from acting. And the difference is, these are two people who could have been on the same path, but one person wasn't willing to humble themselves and do an, all hands on deck approach to their career. So a lot of it is saying, hey, maybe before I direct my first film, I go learn how to get a job as a PA and work myself up to an AD and shadow directors and understand what goes on a set. How do I handle something when everything hits the fan, right? It just, that's something that people really, there's no shortcut to get to the top. Steven started as Steve Levinson's assistant, who is the creator of Entourage and Ballers. And I started as a talent agent's assistant, and I was an assistant for 6 years. There's no shortcut to get here.
That leads to another question. So, back when we first met last year, Adam, I thought that Bondit was a bonding company, right? So when you guys do your films, are you getting them bonded? And if so, have you ever had a bond company that tried to take things back? And, because you're working with emerging filmmakers, sometimes their accounting departments aren't the greatest. Hopefully they're having you guys help, but have you almost had a film that fell apart while it was in production? And if so, why, and how did you right the ship?
Sure. So oftentimes it's when we're working with the studio or somebody who has a bit more of a platform in place, where we'll be required to procure a bond. To procure a bond. In those instances, their fees are high. They're taking 3 or more % of the budget just as their fee, not including what you're going to put into that contingency. But the beauty of our company is, if you use us for senior lending, if you use us for payment, payroll, and post-production, even some of the times we may have enough control, and I say this, some of the times, where we may let the filmmaker negate their bond because it fits better into their finance plan, but because we have such granular control. I think when a financier or a distributor doesn't have that granular control, they're going to be more inclined to ensure that there is a bond in place. Now, on our indie films, I mean, what, our movie in Chicago right now? No, right?
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
that you can't. Yeah, I mean, I think it so much of it just comes back to, who you're hiring on your team from the jump, and that's, again, it's one of these kind of litmus tests that we'll use if somebody has a great script, but their producing partner is the guy next door, and so on and so forth. Much less interesting to us than like someone who, even if you yourself as a director, I mean, here's the irony. Directors are usually the least experienced person on a film set in terms of amount of days on set doing that job that they're there to do, right? So if you know how to build a team, or we can help you, that's competent and that's done it before, then first time directing is no problem. But if you're in, I did a movie a few years back where every department head was just a friend of the director, and like effectively wasn't vetted in the way that it normally would have been, and it did go off the rails. Now we kept it on track and everything was okay, but it was like huge learning lesson for me that these decisions get made before you spend any money, that your team can handle the work, and if you can't get that properly vetted, don't engage further. it's it's not, this is too high risk in success. Like it's too hard even with a great team. So why, we have to at a certain point be able to pass on those kinds of opportunities, even if you love the script, if you're not able to give it the right support.
What are the budget levels that you guys pretty much are working in these days? Obviously, there's different sizes, but what percentage is, maybe under $1 million, or like where's your sweet spot, but what's the range of budgets that you guys are raising money for?
On the bonded side of our business, it can be from $3 to $25 million. But those are, more marketplace bought and sold films. On the Buffalo 8 side of our business, we're probably in that $1 to $5 million range, with most of the movies sitting around 1.5 to 3, I would say is like the sweet spot. I think for us, we understand that when a film goes to a festival, when it is selling, I mean, you may see out of Netflix, oh, such and such got bought for $15 million. It's usually only 1 or 2 movies a year that are getting bought. At that mark, I'd say 2 to 3 million of the very small group of movies that do get bought out of festivals is the likely number. So we're trying to say, hey, let's sit in a space where we have a shot to recoup. Let's not, push that bar because it's just going to be a losing asset.
Yeah, I think just with the climate and distribution right now, there are a lot of producers that have been doing this for decades that are used to such large scale economics on their projects that they can't figure out how to put a movie together right now. Because if it's a $30 million movie and Netflix doesn't buy it, there's not a lot of other options for you. So my certainly philosophy, having come from the micro budget space, is that those in this time who understand how to do more with less and how to put all the money on screen and not in the bells and whistles, and therefore keep your costs down, will be the ones that emerge in this, challenging time, as the ones that who can sustain long-term careers. You have to keep, if you're an early stage filmmaker, you have to keep your costs as low as possible to have any reasonable shot at recouping and getting that investor to make your second movie.
I mean, that budget level is tough, I mean, I haven't produced, I'm semi-retired, so I haven't produced a film in a long time, but I know what, I've still done enough breakdown schedules and budgets to know what $1 million, the micro budget filmmaker thinks, oh my gosh, that's so much money. But when you're doing a micro budget and you don't have any money, nobody expects money from you, which is why I love that no budget space sometimes, because I don't have any money. So people are just going to give me stuff, right? But when you have money, and they hear $1 million budget, a lot of people who don't understand how little money that is, then everybody wants a paycheck. So it's hard to keep that money on screen. Especially, in Georgia, that puts you at the incentive level, but that also puts you at a union level. So the unions are going to knock on your doors. And at that stage, the rates are all negotiable, and, but you're still paying fringes. That's a tough budget space. What are some of the things that may be, red flags for you when somebody's coming to you with a project in that space that hasn't done the work to budget it? Because most filmmakers don't do the actual work to, oh, somebody told me it would cost this, and they haven't done the breakdown, the schedule. They haven't really worked through the numbers.
We try to help them. We try to figure it out. I think it's more interesting, it's more actionable to really find out the lowest possible price that's still of quality than it is to try to raise 5-10 million for, again, first time filmmaker. Like, it's two separate groups of filmmakers, because I think we try to bring in line producer, or even just us ourselves on a read of the script, and give real, clear, good advice as to what we think this would cost, contingent on this shooting location, this level of talent, and so on and so forth, and try to just put something that's realistic and achievable within, as the plan.
So if I'm an independent filmmaker and I'm watching this and I think, I want to call these guys, I've got a great idea. How do you deal with submissions? Do things need to come through a lawyer or agent? Do you not take submissions? Are you only like searching out for things? How does this work?
One, they can always feel free to reach out to us. So we do a very good job of being communicative upfront and giving people the time of day. But the reality is, when a project comes to myself or Steven, we look at it at two fronts. If there's real momentum behind it, as in there's funding in place, there's notable cast, there's a notable director, somebody who we can have a digestible time selling within the marketplace, we'll consider it for our originals division. If it's at an earlier stage, or if it just feels like it'll be heavier lifting, then we may come on in a consulting capacity, whereas we may not take away any of their intellectual property rights, but they may hire us to help them get their financial model intact, help with some of the heavier upfront lifting aspects of that production, while keeping them fully in the driver's seat. So I will say, like, anybody who's watching this, like, feel more than free to reach out to us. We do, I've got a really great team in place, that works with myself and Steven. And so somebody on our team will absolutely be communicative with you, and likely it'll be us. And, you never know, but just, come, I would say singularly focused. We don't like it when people come to us and they put 50 projects in front of us, because the reality is we don't have the bandwidth for that. But if you come to us and say, hey, I have this one project that I'm passionate about, likely we can give you some, at a minimum, advice. But when you put 50 in front of us, it's like, hey, we're busy guys. We don't have that time
What should they be? What should they be? The first
Well,
email that they send, should it be a log line? Should it just,
oh,
what's the first
we'll suss
communication
it
you
out
want?
pretty quickly. I think a friendly hello is fine, because
Yeah.
I think the important thing is, and I hope we've laid it out through the course of this conversation, is that it's just a process to get your movie made. And nobody is going to read a log line or a script and then just write a check tomorrow. There's a lot that you have to do in between to make the economics of the film make sense. And that's where Adam and I really focus our efforts, is let's understand where the film's at and then help it get to where it needs to go. And that's a process that unfolds over time with filmmakers. It's not a, what do you think of this log line? I could love the log line, but if it doesn't have the team members in place or the this everything we talked about, then it's irrelevant. And I think that's a kind of bumps against a lot of writers who just want to be, the quality of their idea to be the thing that we respond to. But that's almost the, like I said, it's one of the lower concerns of the overall things that we're looking at, because a creative idea could go 100 different directions.
I assume that eventually, after that initial hello, you're going to want a log line or a synopsis, or, I just in terms of paperwork, because you talk about, well, we want to, the earlier on in the stages, the better, because then we can help them with all this. But if they come to you with a team already in place that isn't a great team, you kind of got to start back over again anyway. So
Well, yes
I guess
and
it
no.
depends on the project.
Yeah, I think it's project to project, and we're going to have them fill out an intake form. Our office is going to go and vet the project. There's going to be some filters in place to help them get through our system. And just, if anybody wants our info, you can find us on IMDb and email us or reach out. We're more than happy to say hello or chat with you, or come up to us at the festival, when we're in town for it. So, yeah.
So if I have a film that's already completed, how do same process? Or are you
Same
only
deal.
going to festivals and like looking for stuff? You don't.
Look, I think the company, there's a handful of folks in every division that we rattled off, but we're a good access point and we'll get you where you need to go. So just reach out, say hello, and if it's a finished film, a film going into production that's partial financed and so on and so forth, or just a script, or either way, we're pretty good guys to talk to.
Yeah.
Any other advice you'd like to give? I know our time has run out. Is there any more advice you'd like to give for first-time filmmakers, or things, first-time or emerging filmmakers, things for them to be thinking
Yeah.
about we may not have covered?
I think it's just about not giving up. I think ultimately you have to be willing to plant both your feet and commit to just going through the process of getting to where you want to go. I mean, you look at anybody who's had big successes within their career, they've likely come to those successes through a lot of failures. And so the ones who I see from my starting class in Hollywood who have remained resilient are doing unbelievable and incredible things across the board. And that's it at the end of the day. It's just perseverance is what takes you from nothing to something.
I always tell people that talent is great, but drive and ambition beats talent all day long. But if the two combine, it's a superpower. Like if you have talent and drive and ambition, those are the ones who make it, because not everybody makes it to the NFL from Pee Wee football, and our industry is the same. Steven, do you have any
Perfectly
parting
said.
thoughts?
Oh, it's the same. I think it just the things, anything that, I've done or we've done that's worked is because there was a very self-motivated filmmaker at the center of it. And that's easy to complement someone else's energy when they're that way. And it's hard when they're not. So just take things upon yourself. I used to have a kind of funny guiding mantra, which was always say yes. But the reason why is because if someone needs a favor on a set for a Saturday or whatever it may be, every time I say yes to those things, I meet someone interesting and it turns into something else. So just be open, get out there, be self-motivated with, putting your film together. And then I think if you can do all those things, the right support, whether it's us or someone else in your life, will come and complement that and get you to the finish line.
Excellent. Well, thank you, gentlemen, so much. This has been
Thank
a
you.
lovely conversation, I think full of great information for first-time filmmakers. This will actually sadly air after the festival. So yes, we have decided long ago that if we give people the opportunity to sit at home, they will take it. So we want people to show up in person and then get a whole nother set of information afterward. So
Perfect.
yeah.
Well, we'll be there either way.
Yeah,
Well,
I
thank
look
you.
forward to seeing you.
And for everyone watching, it was nice to meet you if we did at the festival.
That's
Excellent.
perfect.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed our Creative Conference virtual panel. There will be more next year. If you have ideas for panels, things you didn't see this year, you are welcome to send a note to education@atlantafilmsociety.org. And I may dismiss them, I may love them. You never know, but we're always open to new ideas. So thank you again, and thanks to our audience.
Thanks, Linda.